The cross on the church altar.
Why it still stand?
Because the cross on the altar is not there to heal the broken. It is there to stabilize the system.
It is there to keep suffering meaningful instead of intolerable. To keep obedience holy instead of humiliating. To keep hierarchy unquestioned instead of exposed.
The cross remains on the altar because it performs a crucial function. It converts historical violence into present-day reverence. It turns trauma into tradition. It turns domination into devotion. It turns obedience into worship. It is not there because it reveals God. It is there because it protects power from scrutiny. A God of peace does not need a symbol that once marched with armies. A God of justice does not need a relic that normalized domination. A God of holiness does not require believers to venerate an object that taught the world how to obey through fear. If salvation were truly about liberation, the altar would not be guarded by an image of authority-inflicted death. If righteousness were truly about truth, no symbol would be exempt from examination. But the cross is exempt because examining it honestly would unravel centuries of control. It would expose how belief was enforced, how conscience was managed, how resistance was reframed as sin. It would reveal that what was called holy war was simply power discovering that holiness could be weaponized. And that is the final clarity. The cross stands on the altar, not because it is sacred, but because it is strategic. Not because it saves, but because it disciplines. Not because it liberates, but because it teaches people how to endure what should never have been normalized. Until that symbol is removed or confronted without myth, the altar will remain a place where power speaks louder than truth, and any salvation preached beneath it will always be compromised by the history it refuses to confess. Every cross said the same thing. Power decides who lives. Christ was not honored on it. He was erased on it. And when his body went silent, the cross did not. It remained standing. Then something darker happened. You took that same cross, still soaked in the memory of fear, and lifted it into the sky. Not in repentance, not in shame, but in victory. You marched it into battle. You placed it at the front of armies, above charging soldiers over blood-soaked fields. The symbol of execution became the symbol of expansion. The wood that held a dying man now led men to kill in his name. The cross learned to fly, not as peace, but as permission. Permission to conquer. Permission to dominate. Permission to erase. fell beneath it. Cultures bowed before it. Languages disappeared under its shadow. And every scream was justified, because heaven was now claimed to be watching from above the blade. Christ died once, but the cross kept conquering. It crossed borders before it crossed hearts. It arrived backed by soldiers, not invitation. Backed by crowns, not conscience. It did not ask people what they believe. It told them what to believe. Shrines were broken. Sacred stories were renamed pagan. Ancestral wisdom was declared darkness. The cross did not debate. It replaced. It trained obedience. Then, after the conquest was complete, you changed its setting. You brought the cross indoors. You cleaned it, polished it, decorated it. You wrapped it in gold to hide the rust of blood. You surrounded it with candles to soften the shadow it cast. You placed it on the church altar and called it holy. But holiness does not erase history. A symbol does not become sacred by relocation. A weapon does not become righteous by ritual. You ask people to kneel before it, to bow their heads before the same shape that once demanded submission at sword point. You ask them to see love in a symbol that trained fear. You ask them to see peace in a sign that authorized violence. You ask them to see righteousness in an object that disciplined entire populations into silence. And when questions rise, you call them rebellion. But holiness that fears examination is not holiness. It is protection.
Where is the holiness?
In a symbol that executed dissent.
Where is the holiness?
In a sign that flew over conquest.
Where is the holiness?
In an emblem that taught obedience before compassion. If the biblical God is a God of peace, why did peace arrive last? If the biblical God is a God of love, why did love come armed? If the altar represents righteousness, why does it center a symbol that served power so efficiently? Why must the cross be untouchable after it touched domination? Why must it be worshipped after it was used to command loyalty? You cannot separate the cross from its journey. Execution, conquest, worship. That order matters. Because what comes first reveals purpose, and what comes last reveals rebranding. The cross was not lifted because it healed. It was lifted because it worked. It worked to control bodies. It worked to discipline minds. It worked to unify empire under obedience. And anything that works this well for power will always be declared holy by those who benefit from its silence. memorializing domination. Because true holiness does not arrive through fear, and the God of righteousness does not need conquest to be believed.
I will not go to church to worship until the cross is removed from the altar, until the center of devotion is no longer occupied by a symbol whose history is heavier than its sermons, older than its hymns, louder than its prayers. The cross, banner of conquest, a symbol that was carried into wars, where lands were conquered in the name of heaven, where cities fell beneath sacred banners, where belief was enforced by steel and decree. A symbol marched through colonial expansions, raised over Africa, the Americas, Asia and the islands, standing beside foreign flags, foreign lords, foreign gods, while native worlds were declared sinful, primitive, or cursed. Cross of conquest, a symbol flown before empires, that baptized conquest as destiny, that turned invasion into mission, that called domination divine order. A symbol placed on ships crossing oceans, not to ask permission, but to announce ownership, to claim bodies, labor, language and land, before a word of consent was ever spoken. Cross of conquest, a symbol used to suppress ancestral knowledge, to label indigenous wisdom as darkness, to silence drums, erase names, outlaw rituals, and replace memory with obedience. A symbol used to discipline the poor, teaching them that suffering is holy, that endurance is virtue, that justice must wait for another world, while inequality thrives in this one. The cross, a symbol used to calm resistance, to tell the oppressed to forgive too quickly, to accept change as character building, to confuse patience with righteousness and silence with faith. A symbol invoked to bless authority, to shield kings, governors and institutions from scrutiny, to declare hierarchy natural, power ordained, and questioning a spiritual crime. Holy Cross, a cross of conquest, a symbol that stood beside slavery, that hovered over plantations and forced labor, that preached obedience to the wounded, while promising heaven as compensation. A symbol that traveled through wars of empire, through holy campaigns and civilizing missions, through borders redrawn without consent, through cultures reshunned without mercy. Cross of conquest at the altar, and after all this, after conquest, suppression, erasure and control, it is placed gently on the altar and called pure. As if gold can erase memory, as if incense can cleanse history, as if repetition can undo what a symbol has enforced. Cross! I cannot worship at an altar where a tool of domination is renamed holiness, where a history of control is hidden behind devotion, where the weight of suffering is disguised as salvation, because a symbol that has overseen canvas cannot protect innocence. Race have culprits, and a God of peace does not require an emblem that once suppressed truth, culture, resistance, and human dignity to speak on its behalf.
The cross did not begin as hope, it began as a threat. It was not designed to save, it was engineered to terrify. A vertical post to display authority, a horizontal beam to stretch resistance until it broke. A public message carved into wood and flesh. This is what power does to those who refuse it. That was the cross's original theology. Before hymns, before halos, before sermons, the cross was Rome's loudest language. It spoke fluently in fear. It taught obedience without words. It trained populations by example. It did not meet the cross as mercy. You met it as warning. And then something happened that should never be ignored. Power realized how useful it was. The cross was not redeemed, it was repurposed. Rome did not abandon violence. When it adopted the cross, it baptized it. The empire did not lay down the sword. It placed scripture on the hilt. The same state that perfected public execution declared the execution device holy and demanded reverence for it. That is not transformation. That is branding. The cross became a genius of control.
Fear, now spiritual submission, now virtuous suffering, now meaningful resistance, now sinful.
What once said obey or die, now whispered submit and be saved.
Different tone,
Same destination. The cross did not travel with Christ, it traveled with empire. The cross did not spread gently, it crossed borders before it crossed hearts. It arrived with soldiers, not consent, with decrees, not dialogue, with replacement, not relationship. It stood beside flags, it hovered over ships, it marked land before people spoke. Where it went, it did not ask what was already sacred. It declared everything before it insufficient. Ancestral wisdom became darkness. Indigenous names became pagan. Living cultures became lost. The cross did not convert, it displaced. And every displacement was called love. The cross taught people to endure what should have been destroyed. Under the cross, suffering was no longer a problem to solve. It became a virtue to admire. Pain was reframed as purpose, delay as divine timing, exploitation as spiritual training. The poor were told to carry their cross. The wounded were told to forgive quickly. The oppressed were told heaven would make it fair later. And the systems causing the harm, they were prayed for, not dismantled. That is not salvation. That is sedation. The cross did not liberate bodies. It trained them to wait quietly. The cross is a master class in psychological control. It teaches obedience through admiration of suffering. It conditions loyalty through reverence for pain. It binds conscience to authority. Questioning becomes rebellion. Thinking becomes pride. Calm becomes dangerous. Freedom becomes suspicious. The ideal believer is not awake. They are compliant. Not discerning, but dependent. Not empowered, but managed. This is not accidental. This is design. The cross at the altar is a lie about history. Placing the cross at the center of worship pretends it was always about love. It crosses. It pretends it never marched with armies. It did. It pretends it never sanctioned conquers. It did. It pretends it never silenced cultures. It did. The altar becomes a laundering site where blood memory is scrubbed with incense and repetition replaces truth. Gold does not erase history. Hymns do not absolve symbols. Ritual does not cleanse violence. A God of peace does not need an execution device as a logo. If holiness requires terror, it is not holy. If righteousness needs domination, it is not righteous. If salvation must be taught through fear, it is not salvation. A God who needs the cross as proof is a God built by empire, not truth. Because truth does not need scaffolds. Peace does not need warnings. Freedom does not need symbols of obedience.
The cross is a banner of contrast. It did not spread by persuasion. It advanced with armies. It was planted where resistance fell. It rose where languages were erased. Those who lived under its shadow did not misunderstand it. They recognized it immediately. They saw it carried by men with weapons. They saw it raised after defeat. They saw it standing where homes once stood. No translation was needed. Power speaks clearly. To the conquered, the cross was never abstract. It was not metaphor. It was not theology. it meant your gods are finished. Your land now answers to another authority. Your memory is illegal. Your survival requires obedience. Unbird, it was renamed love. The cross was not merely present in concrete, it authorized it. It baptized expansion, it sanctified occupation, it turned invasion into mission, and resistance into rebellion against God. Under its banner, borders moved, peoples vanished, and history was rewritten as salvation. Those forced to kneel beneath it learned its meaning quickly. They learned that refusal brought punishment, that questioning brought exile, that acceptance brought conditional mercy. Conversion was not conviction, it was survival. And survival was later called faith. Today, the cross rests quietly on altars, polished, softened, sentimentalized. But objects do not lose their past, because time passed. Symbols remember what sermons hide. And the cross still carries the weight of what it did. That is why it must be defended so fiercely. That is why questioning it is taboo. Because once you name it honestly, its authority dissolves. Once you call it a banner of conquest, it can no longer pretend to be merely a symbol of love. The cross did not unite humanity, it organized hierarchy. It did not liberate cultures, it replaced them. It did not heal trauma, it demanded silence about it. And those who live beneath its shadow know this truth in their bones, even if they were taught to kneel before it. This is not an insult to the dead. This is respect for their memory. Because refusing to name the cross honestly is the final conquest.
The cross on the church altar.
Why is to stand?
Because the cross on the altar is not there to heal the broken. It is there to stabilize the system.
It is there to keep suffering meaningful instead of intolerable. To keep obedience holy instead of humiliating. To keep hierarchy unquestioned instead of exposed.